important test that was part of the Operation Castle nuclear tests conducted in the Marshall Islands by the U.S. military in the 1950s. This particular device was the first TX-17 thermonuclear weapon to be detonated, which is a thermonuclear bomb in a deployable casing. Placed on a barge at Bikini Atoll above a crater that had been formed by a previous test, the Castle Romeo device used lithium deuteride as the fuel for the fusion stage of the detonation. Because at the time, the way this compressed fuel behaves under conditions that are generated during an explosion wasn't fully understood, scientists had only expected a yield of around 4 megatons. But in the event, it generated an explosive force of 11 megatons of TNT, which made it the third most powerful test ever carried out by the US. Not only did the test obliterate the surrounding area and significantly increase the size of the crater that was already beneath it, but it also produced some of the most important images of a nuclear detonation ever captured, and the most regularly reprinted one because of how perfectly formed the mushroom cloud was. Furthermore, it was seen as such a success that its design was put into production, and the 5 EC-17 bombers that were made became the first deployable thermonuclear weapons in the US military's arsenal. The program that developed the first nuclear weapons, spurred on by the fear that the Second World War would continue indefinitely, scientists from several nations combined forces to create a weapon that would end it all. By 1945, they were ready, and on July 16th of that year, the first ever nuclear test was conducted, one that was known as Trinity. The device itself was an implosion-designed plutonium weapon of a similar type to the one that was ultimately dropped on Nagasaki less than a month later. Nicknamed the Gadget, its yield was the equivalent to 22 kilotons of TNT and was detonated in the Jornada del Muerto Desert, which is around 35 miles to the southeast of the city of Socorro in New Mexico. With 2 B-29s circling overhead to observe the results, the bomb formed a crater that was 4.7 feet deep and 262 feet across. The intense heat of the blast melted the desert sand, which was made of mainly silica, and produced a light green glass called trinitite that was slightly radioactive and covered an area almost 1,000 feet around the explosion site. This successful test arguably changed the world forever, and not only changed the direction of the Second World War, but was so powerful that other nations had no choice but to join the nuclear arms race in an attempt to keep themselves on equal footing. Number 14. Project Bois Bleu was the first nuclear test undertaken by France, which made it the 4th country to officially become a nuclear power. Placed at the top of a 328-foot-tall tower at a test facility in the Sahara Desert in Algeria, the plutonium-filled bomb was of a completely brand new design. As often the case with weapons like these, no one was entirely sure how powerful it would be. It turned out to be the most explosive first test ever carried out at that point, measuring 70 kilotons. It was 3 times more powerful than the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. Despite being widely celebrated across France, nations in Africa weren't so pleased because of the proximity of the test. And in many ways, they were right, with nuclear fallout being detected in Senegal, the Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and Sudan. Incredibly, in 2021, unusually strong winds carried dust up from the Sahara to France. These particles had detectable traces of cesium-137 that could be linked to the tests as part of the Jerbois program. Number 10, your test conducted by the People's Republic of China, part of the country's 2 bombs, 1 satellite program, which aimed to catch up with the United States and the Soviet Union in both weapons and space technology. It took place at the Lop-Nor Salt Lake Test Facility on the 16th of October 1964. The bomb itself was a uranium-235 implosion fission device that had a yield of around 22 kilotons of TNT, which made it comparable to the one that was released over Nagasaki. At this point, it wasn't housed within a deployable shell, and the test was to prove that the technology would work. It was detonated on top of a 335-foot-tall tower, and the success shocked the world. The United States government hadn't realized China's ability to refine uranium was so advanced, and it turned out that it was only possible because of the help provided by the Soviet Union. In response to this test, the United States, Soviet Union, and China signed the 1968 Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and Chinese authorities have made clear that they have a no-first-use doctrine, which means they only ever intend to use nuclear weapons in retaliation. Number 13 led to the creation of the first nuclear device, but it would be another 7 years before that country developed and tested a weapon of its own. Known as Project Hurricane, this test took place on the 3rd of October 1952 and was conducted in a lagoon in the Montebello Islands of Western Australia. It was a plutonium implosion device that had been fitted to a barge that was anchored in the lagoon, and the resulting explosion was measured to be approximately equivalent to 25 kilotons of TNT. The explosion itself took place just under 9 feet below the waterline and formed a crater in the seabed that was 20 feet deep and 980 feet across. The fallout cloud soon rose to an altitude of 10,000 feet, and while the initial plan for this to blow out across the ocean worked as intended, changing weather conditions meant that part of it was blown back over the mainland, with low levels of radiation detected as far away as Brisbane. The success of this test made Britain the world's third nuclear power, and it was only a further 3 years until deployable bombs based on the Project Hurricane design, as well as aircraft capable of releasing them, were ready to be used by the Royal Air Force. Number 11, all of what is now the Marshall Islands on the 1st of November 1952. Ivy Mike was the first time a second-generation nuclear weapon, more commonly known as a thermonuclear device, was tested by any nation. Using a Teller-Ulam design, Ivy Mike wasn't anything close to being a deployable bomb, and the Soviets even referred to it as a thermonuclear installation. Weighing 82 tons, it looked more like a building and used liquid deuterium as the fuel for the fusion reaction that would take place. Seen as a proof-of-concept test, the results were so surprising that the explosion created 2 never-before-seen elements and took nuclear weaponry to a whole new level of destruction, with a measured yield of 10.4 megatons. The fireball that was created grew to a radius of 2.1 miles, and within 90 seconds the mushroom cloud had risen to a height of 56,000 feet. Within a couple of minutes, the cloud had reached a maximum altitude of 135,000 feet and was 100 miles wide. Back on the ground, once the explosion had cleared, a crater had been formed that was 6,200 feet in diameter and 164 feet deep, meaning that the island had been completely obliterated. The waves that it created stripped the surrounding islands of all their vegetation, and radioactive coral debris rained down on observation ships more than 35 miles away. The blast had been so powerful that one of the researchers involved in its development, who was in California at the time, detected the shock wave as it passed through the Earth on a seismometer and declared the project a success even before any communications had come through from the test site itself. Number 12.